Okay, well, I'm Vicky Elcote. I'm the chair of Dorset Climate Action Network, and I'm also one of the coordinators of the new Rivers and Beaches team. And the other coordinator is Andrew Carey. And if Andrew speaks and you've got him on speaker view, he will pop up so you can see him.
Lo and behold.
Fabulous. And the other important person for this meeting is Sandra Reeve, who is from Dorset Climate Action Network and the River Char, and she's the facilitator. So she's going to hold us all to time and make sure we don't overrun. So Sandra, would you like to say hello?
Hello, challenge of the evening.
Yeah, absolutely. And the purpose of the meeting, it's our first meeting as a new team, and we are here to basically gather information and resources from around Dorset about all the river action that's taking place, all your inspiring work. And even if you're not involved in a river group, you're here to learn from others, and maybe you will get one started where you live. And I'm personally involved with the River Limb Action Group, which has been going for 4 years now. And yeah, we pride ourselves on being really dynamic. And the other, I will come on to that one in a minute about Dorset Can. We're also here to share good practice and support with each other, and speak up where we have problems or we need help. And that's particularly the purpose of the breakout sessions. And the idea is that we learn from each other. People who are more experienced can help out others who want to know how to get going, or what to do, or what we monitor, or how we campaign, or how we deal with the water company, that kind of thing. So I will, yeah, if Andrew, you could put that slide up about Dorset Can now. So you just all know which organisation we are from and what we're about. So Dorset Can is a community-led action to cut carbon emissions, adapting to our changing climate and restoring nature across Dorset. We're a charity. We're all volunteers. Everybody here is a volunteer, but we have some paid people who help us out. And as we fundraise more successfully, we get more paid people so we can do more and organise better. We have an action team which meets every other week, and that basically sets our direction and steers us and makes decisions. We have 950 members, none of which pay a subscription, but a lot of you very kindly donated during our recent appeal during the Big Green Match Fund week. Thank you if you did that, it was really welcome. We have 79 organisations as members. We have about 2,500 followers around Dorset through our various campaigns. We have various groups, which I won't list, and now you can add to that the Rivers and Beaches group. And we have 5 big projects, the biggest of which is the Great Big Dorset Hedge, because it has the most volunteers and the most money, as really successful. We're also working for low energy neighbourhoods on the Dorset Local Plan, which is the Dorset Deserves Better campaign. We're a partner in the Dorset COP, which is the annual gathering about climate action. And we provide carbon literacy training to community groups, individuals, and town and parish councils. So that's what we are. And we can now get on with the reason why we're here. I'm going to introduce Simon Browning, who's our speaker, a bit later on. The first bit of the meeting is for all of you to you know, use it as Sandra will guide you, and that's what she's going to do now.
Yes, so again, really welcome to everybody, and there's a lot of us here this evening. So just a little bit of etiquette for a big group. Could you please mute yourself if you're not actually talking? That would be really helpful. And if it comes round and you do have a question, ideally if you can use the react button at the bottom of the screen, which is a little heart. If you click on the heart, it'll come up with a raise hand button, and you can just press that to raise your hand and click it again to take the hand down. I will also look out for people who are physically putting their hands up. If you could keep your questions and any points you want to make as concise as possible, because at Dorset Can, we really value everybody's voice, and it's great if we can hear as many views as possible. The wisdom of the whole group is valued and respected, and I think that's all I need to say. for now. I'm just thinking if there's anything I've left out there. I think that's good. Oh yeah, and also if you've really appreciated the point that somebody's made in this bigger group, we do still, from COVID days onwards, still do these jazz hands, as they're called. Just because we're in a virtual space here, and it can sometimes feel like an empty echo chamber if there isn't some kind of response coming back. So that would be really nice if we could do that. I think that's all I need to say for that. So we'll start with the first section of this evening, which was an invitation to different rivers and different, it is actually almost all different rivers, to speak for 3 minutes. I have a clock here. I have a mobile phone timer here. I'm in a state of panic. But for each river to speak for 3 minutes, ideally, about what you're doing currently or something that you'd like to share with the wider river community about your practice at the moment, or about, yeah, ideally what you're doing. And we have 2, 4, 6, about 8 different lots of people going to speak. If everybody keeps to time, there may be time for an impromptu speaker as well, if you had something you wanted to add. After that, we will be going into breakout rooms to have a little bit more time for everybody to express what their river needs, or in fact, to share where they would like to join a river. I'll give you the focus question later, just as we go into the breakout rooms. Please do stay and join one of those groups, also to share what you know or to learn from other groups. And after that, we'll be having a presentation from Simon Browning when we all come back to the main room. And then there will be questions for him and possibly for others that you may have heard speak. So that's the general drift of the evening. And I'd like to start now by asking River Froome, Ian Benson, if you would like to open our evening with what you would like to say about your river.
Thank you. Well, we started a project called the Froome River Action Group, mainly concentrated on removing Himalayan balsam from the river, and we worked on tributaries of the Froome in the headwaters in around Benville, Evershot, and then moving down towards Froome St Quintin, all the way down to about 4 miles down. So that's what we did. I became ill, so I had to stop it. But Dominic Stubbing has done a wonderful work. He was chair of the River Froome and Piddle Authority Association, and he had invented a way to really cut down the balsam in an extraordinary number of places, huge areas, and we've hopefully handed over to the landowners the responsibility to keep down the Himalayan balsam. We were doing some monitoring of the river quality as well, but we haven't continued with that. I think that I have put in the chat a website there, dorcef.org/. It's part of the an initiative of the Dorset Christian Fellowship. As we look after God's creation. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ian. That's fantastic. I know there are several groups working with Himalayan balsam, so it'd be really interesting to find out more about how you've been doing that. Thank you a lot, and for keeping to time. And then the next river would be the River Lim, and I think is that Graham Roberts who's going to speak to us?
Hi,
Graham?
can you hear me all right, Sandra?
Yep, that's good. Could be a
Right.
bit louder, but it's great. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. The River Lim's been going over 2 years now, and we've got an extremely active group. I think some of our successes perhaps are a fully trained complement of active river flight monitors covering at least 8 sites monthly from April through till October. We've got our second year of Himalayan balsam work, where we've actually got 12 volunteer days booked this year. We're doing Fridays and Saturdays. We're doing June, July and August, and so we'll do 4 days in each of those months. And last year it was a funny year because the balsam grew very quickly because there was so much rain, and really by the end of the year in August and September, it was already, the seeds were popping, it was getting too big. And this year it's almost the opposite, because we've had such a dry spell. The balsam isn't very advanced at the moment, and so that's why we're doing 2 days at the beginning of June and then 2 days at the end of June. So we'll see how that goes to hit some of the bad areas. We've only got a small catchment, but we have got a lot of balsam, particularly in the headwaters, which is where we're concentrating effort. We are doing regular chemical monitoring. Credit must go to Vicky and Liz really for getting our beach redesignated. Of only the 2 that DEFRA accepted for beaches, was getting Church Beach redesignated, which means we can get now backing and support from the Environment Agency and more regular monitoring during the bathing season. So that's really important. I think the profile's maintained. We did a landowner day, which was a leaflet drop to every household. We had 127 people turn up for our evening. That was actually funded through Farming in Protected Landscape from East Devon. And from that, we've got a sort of a wish list of things, thinking out of the box a little bit. When you're on a committee, it's so easy to be blinkered and do what you want to do. And what we've tried to do is to be more inclusive. So from that, there'll be some new initiatives, if we can get funding, which will come forward over the next few years. We've secured funding for the group for 5 years, some support funding from Lyme Regis Town Council. So we've got complete support from them. There's regular dialogue meetings, and we do updates to the local council at the Environment Committee. So we're very active. Are we making headway? That's the big question we all must be asking. We have to keep this pressure up. I think if we don't keep our endeavours up, we will be ignored. So I think be as vociferous as you can, get as much support on social media and blogs as you possibly can. Anybody who wants to do articles or whatever, through our group, somehow there's always somebody available to give live interviews and do things. It's important that we keep up this, and I think that's really all I need to say, really. So thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Graham. That's spot on 3 minutes. Thank you so much. And also just to say, the Landowner Day sounds like a really interesting initiative, and that's something that I've pricked up my ears at, as possibly for other groups as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so next, can we have the River Simony? Have I pronounced that right, Bob? And 3 minutes for you.
Simony.
Simony, thank you.
Simony is one of the is the western tributary to the Brit. The Brit Valley project is very big, going on. I see Dana and from West Dorset Wilding is in the room, but she's not going to be speaking. I'm not going to go into details on that, but we will be trained to do work with that big project. There are 6 plus me, 7 people in the Simonsbury parish who are doing river fly. And we have 4 locations. It had been very intermittent up till now, but it's going to get much more together, I hope. And there'll be some CSI monitoring too. The Simony is a very silty river. It's been straightened, and the landowners will be re-wiggling it, as they say, as part of that big project. And there's a lot going on there. But as far as we're concerned, we'll be just adding our little bit to the data on cartographer for now. Let's see. There is flash flood risk from one of the tributary catchments that could be very severe in big, and I'm working with the Parish Council on risk management, and there may we're trying to put into a plan something like how can we reduce the risk of flash flood, i.e. we can do hedges. So using risk assessments in order to do good environmental things and get things done because it's necessary. That's going, we're getting the resilience plan sort of figured out, and that will be part of it. Foundry Lee is a big project, a building project in our area, and is producing a lot of mud. The environmental impact statement and measures are actually, they're measuring it 4 times a year, but it's not the Environment Agency who's monitoring this, it's themselves. They're marking their own homework, which is a little bit, well, a lot of mud's come off that site. And there's not much we can do about it. CSI monitoring isn't up to it because it's muddy when it goes in, and it's how much muddier it is when it comes out is impossible to tell during floods because it's already at our maximum. So we are a small river. There are people doing stuff, but the big stuff is being done by the government-backed Brit Valley project.
Thanks very much, Bob. And it's great that you bring the notion of resilience also into this conversation and preempting as far as possible mitigation.
Yes,
and we will be hearing from the River Brit a bit later, so thank you very much. And so if we can move on to the River Char, that's Andrew. And if people who aren't speaking could mute.
Mute it.
That's me, River Char, in between Bob Simony and the River Lim earlier. We are doing all kinds of things, in many that Graham and Bob just talked about, river fly monitoring, citizen science. We're doing bacteriology to measure E. coli and Enterococcus with the help of Wessex Water. We do river walks, we do daylighting working parties, we do leaky dams, we do Himalayan balsam, we do information evenings and films and so on. The point about it all, there are several. One is we're utterly dependent on all sorts of people, from Dorset AONB as was, Dorset National Landscape, for the snapshot study they did in the first place, which has really helped us to see the risks and opportunities we have, and to, I hope, ask the right questions, which I think Simon may be going to talk about later, which is the starting. It's terribly easy to end up going off in all kinds of directions. Are we worried about agriculture or septic tanks or the Wessex Water, or what are the problems? So the help we've had come from Dorset National Landscape and Dorset Wildlife Trust, enormous help, from Char Valley Parish Council, who got us funded in the first place, from Wessex Water, who've been a mine of information, from the Environment Agency, who don't have time but managed to find some. And I forgot to mention our Charmouth Dragon River Festival as a way of engaging people. We're really a river of two halves, upstream worried about agriculture and septic tanks, downstream worried about spills and so on from the sewage system. So for now, that's the River Char.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And it's great listening to these different rivers and what we can remember, who you can speak to about different forms of testing or different activities if you want more advice for your own river. I'm actually, just because it just came in at the last minute, I'm going to read out a message from Sheila Hawkins, who's the Broad Windsor Group Parish Area. That's how she defined herself. She said, and this is the message. I am a volunteer involved in setting up the Little Axe group to set up a water quality monitoring group across Broad Windsor Group parish area. We hope to eventually become involved in the River Axe catchment project. We have been in conversation with Vicky Whitworth and also the West Country Rivers Trust, and are currently establishing some dipping sites in Broad Windsor and Drimpton and at Seaborough on the River Axe. So she will be on the list of contacts, but if there's anybody here from that area who would like to get involved, she's very keen to have some more volunteers. So that's that group. And I think we're doing amazingly well. We might even have to have a party or something. No. River Brit, Ian, could you speak to us and about the River Brit? It's your moment.
My moment. Okay. Well, I'm going to break the rules and talk a little bit more widely than just the Brit to start with, because the water environment geographically is a complicated thing, but politically it's also a very complicated thing. For our intents and purposes, it's kind of split into three in Dorset. Rivers that flow into Poole Harbour is one, rivers that flow into Christchurch Harbour is another characteristic, and then everything else that flows into the kind of into the sea is called the West Dorset Rivers and Coastal Streams. So this is from the Char in the west all the way through to the Swan in the east, including the Brit and the Bride and the Wey and everything else that flows southwards. Nominally Dorset National Landscape, who I work for, oversee activities in that. We don't get any money for it. I don't have any extra resources to do it, but the aim is to try and support communities, people like you, to make the right decisions to look after your water environment. I will put something in the chat with my contact details. And if you're in that patch, then do get in touch, and there hopefully some useful information on our website as well. One of the areas that I am working on is the River Brit. So this includes the Cymene, the Mangerton and the Asker that all converge on Bridport. Looking at the health of that river and also reducing flood risk. So the big project on at the moment from my point of view is something called the Natural Flood Management Project, trying to slow the flow of water through the system so that it doesn't create as much havoc as it reaches Bridport and also Bedminster in the headwaters. It also carries a lot of silt, 6,000 tonnes annually. We'd like to keep that on the fields and on the hills as much as possible. So we're trying to capture and slow the flow of sediment as well as water. We've got £600,000 from the Environment Agency to do that. So it's a big chunk of money. We've got 30 plus sites where we're going to be doing things. We've got 17 landowners who have signed up to help. And we've also got 17 volunteers who are going to help us undertake a lot of the monitoring. It's a good project because we get lots of money for monitoring, which is often not the way. So we've got 27 water level gauges throughout the catchment. We'll be turning that water level into flow and then discharge. So we will know how much water and when it's moving through the system and whether our efforts are slowing the flow and reducing the flood peaks. We've spent a year getting to the point where we've got the landowners signed up, the monitoring kit installed and volunteers trained up. We now have 2 years to do the interesting stuff, and we'll be starting. I don't know if Dana's going to talk about the Brit Valley project, but there is another project with exactly the same geography going on that is looking to work with landowners and farmers over the next 20 years. So from my point of view, we're starting this natural flood management project, and we will hand it over to the Brit Valley project to kind of make sure the benefits are maintained over that period of time. They will be doing a lot more than just that, and I won't be handing it over. I'll be staying involved, I'm sure. So that is that in a nutshell. Other things going on. So that's quite a focused project. I'm also trying to pull together a strategic monitoring plan for the Brit, which sounds very grand, but I'm sure you'll hear something similar from Simon later about trying to understand what the issues we're really concerned about are, the logic from those issues through to the sources of those problems, and what we need to do to monitor to see if the problem is getting better or worse or even exists in the first place. Rivers are monitored quite extensively compared to a lot of other habitats, but as the case goes with all sorts of things, the more data, you never have enough data, you always need more. So we'll be trying to bring together citizens to fill in the gaps from the strategic monitoring that already takes place to help us understand the situation on the Brit. The issue there is my capacity. I don't have enough, so that's languishing, I'm afraid. And then the other bit of good news that we've got going on in the Brit catchment is we were very generously donated the shell of a pharmaceutical laboratory. I can't say that word, laboratory, yeah, whatever it is, lab. So we've got a shell of a lab and we're looking to fill it with useful kit so that we can do more detailed river quality analysis from the bacteriological that Andrew's already mentioned through to sediment monitoring and other water quality stuff. It's in tandem with Pineapple Estate, who are using it for soils, which makes sense because water quality kind of first is impacted when it lands on the fields. So understanding soils and understanding water quality is where we want to get to, but we're at the very beginning of that journey. So that's a rapid run through. Sorry if I was rambling, but I'll hand you back to Sandra.
Thanks very much, Ian. That's fantastic. I was going to ask Donna rather belatedly whether she'd like to, yes, would you like to speak for 3 minutes about the Brit project? That might be a good moment now to follow up from what Ian was saying, and then we can get a full picture there. Well, a 6-minute picture, yeah.
Thank you, Sandra. You'll have to cut me because I might waffle. Yeah, thanks, Ian, for introducing the Brit Valley project, which is really an umbrella organisation which is picking up on the natural flood management work that is underway. And we're basically a landscape recovery project that we're in the project development phase, working in the Brit catchment with the mainly focusing around the rivers Brit, Mangerton, Asker, Cymene. And we're working with 57 farmers and landowners across the catchment. Their core land makes up about half the rural area in the Brit catchment, so it's a significant amount of connectivity. And we're looking at all kinds of ways that we can restore nature, restore ecosystems, and obviously a really important part of that is restoring the water environment. And what feeds into the rivers in the catchment. So we're working with farmers to create to make nature positive land use changes. So that might include regenerative farming. So we're not looking to rewild particularly. We're looking to create sustainable, productive landscapes that are also making space for nature, so that nature can support food production. So the whole thing is viewed very holistically. We're in the development phase, so we're about halfway in, but we seem to have got quite good traction with our project. We call the farmers and landowners who've signed up our project partners, and there seems to be a real enthusiasm for working in this way. We're very much dependent upon government funding, although we are looking at blended finance, which is a whole can of worms, and green finance. We are also going to be partly funded by DEFRA, assuming that DEFRA does end up funding nature-based, nature-friendly farming. Actually, as a little aside, can I just draw everyone's attention to the RSPB campaign at the moment to write to your MP to ask them to support nature-friendly farming? It's just a really, I think it's a really important, vital part of how we can improve the health of our rivers. So that's all I really have to say at the moment, but I'm happy to sort of ask any questions later.
Thank you, Donna. That's really great that you can offer us that, because it also helps us to remember that rivers aren't an isolated area of interest, but somehow the more we can connect all these different areas of passion together, the better it is. We've just got one more group to speak, which is the crowd, which I'll talk about in a minute, but I don't think Henry Shepherd is here, is he? So I will just mention, if I can, just see if I can just do this, and if not, I'll pass it by. So Henry Shepherd is a communities coordinator for River Action UK, and he was planning to be here tonight with this question. He's involved, this is an interesting one actually. He's involved in a project where they're collecting stories from individuals, businesses, events, clubs, and community groups who've been financially impacted by water pollution, whether through cancelled events, lost working days, reduced footfall, or other knock-on effects. So this is a slightly different angle, but worth, I think, thinking about, which he's obviously doing. And Henry was wondering if we at DCAN had come across any such examples, or if any members of the River Char Action Group had come across that, because he was talking to us. But if any of you there have been impacted in any way financially by water pollution, he'd really like to hear from you. And Andrew, I'm hoping will be able to put his contact email in the chat before the end of tonight's meeting. So that's Henry Shepherd from River Action UK, who's the communities coordinator. And I think that's worth mentioning this evening. So we just have a few minutes left for me to pass you over to Andrew again, this time representing Crowd. Andrew, can you tell us what Crowd is?
I can. Crowd stands for Clean Rivers of West Dorset. I guess following on from what I was saying earlier about the people we're dependent on and have been dependent on, another important connection, of course, is upwards, as it were, to Dorset Council, and beyond that to the government, which is where any significant change is likely to happen. And going back to the River Char for 1 second, we've got a charter for the River Char which calls on the government to make legal changes. But our way of working with our MP, which we set up on the River Char with our previous MP and continuing with the Edward Morello, the new Lib Dem, is to work as a group of the 6 rivers of West Dorset, which are basically the rivers in the West Dorset constituency. And it's given us, I think, a significant voice, both with Wessex Water, with the Environment Agency, and some access to DEFRA and so on. And I'm suggesting here that since we're talking about the whole of Dorset, it may be an idea for rivers, perhaps in other constituencies, using a constituency boundary rather than a catchment one, or alongside a catchment one, as a way of river groups coming together to get a bit more clout and to get the ear of their MP, who probably hasn't got time to listen to half a dozen rivers, but may be able to come to a meeting of one. So that would be a recommendation. And if I can just share my screen for a moment, we have also, as part of Crowd, but here it's showing as a Dorset Can document, produced a set of resources and basically a reading list, which is the kind of information that I think Simon will be talking about later. But for anyone who wants to know, wants a place to start thinking about a river, and these are all things that we have done and have resources, have used as resources at Crowd. There's this general reading list, local stuff, and what to do if you want to start a river action group, which is really where Simon will come in later. So I can circulate this list afterwards, and I'll put a link to it in the chat now. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Andrew. So that's interesting, moving from individual rivers to catchments to projects, and then also the idea of groups of rivers coming together, maybe more geographically or constituency, not sure either, including, of course, BCP and and Dorset can, this team, that Vicky and Andrew are leading, could become a kind of umbrella for those kind of groups. So just sowing the seed of that possibility. Okay, so we're now going to suggest, or I'm going to suggest, that we go into breakout rooms. I'm right, aren't I, Vicky? That's what I'm doing now? Yes, thank you. Just needed a bit of... So, and we have a question for you. So you might want to jot this question down. I'm not sure that I can put it in all the breakout rooms, but I'll try to. It's a very simple question, but it's a bit long. So whether you're part of a river group or of another organisation, or whether you want to start a river group or get involved with one, or if you're an interested individual, what support or information do you need? What are the gaps in your knowledge, and what are you struggling to do? So we're kind of asking people to share what they know and to ask for what they don't know. And you may get an answer from someone in your group. We have a kind of inverted commas expert in each of the breakout rooms. I leave you to work out who that is, and at least one. And if you could just have a chat, and if you could also appoint a note taker to record the points that are raised, because it would be great if you could send these bullet points later, ideally straight after the meeting, if there are not too many of them, to Andrew or to Vicky, and we'll put the emails in the chat, because then we can actually map what are the evolving concerns in Dorset at this particular moment in time. There will be themes that are emerging, and if we can kind of map that more through the county, that's very useful to see what, as DCAM, we can provide as information, and where we can go for other sources of information. I think that's it. I'm going to launch you in, and we'll just be in for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll be coming back to hear from Simon and to have a question and answer session. If questions come up, as they may have already during the evening, for Simon, please make a note of them. And Simon, thank you. Over to you, Vicky.
Yeah, so I'm just going to do a quick promo, because the Dorset Councils has asked us to promote the local nature recovery strategy consultation, which is focusing on rivers. And they can't be here, but we promised that we would share this with you. So please have your say on the local nature recovery strategy, and its exciting plans to make more space for nature, including a priority for rivers, lakes and wetlands. Hooray! And you've got until the 30th of July, so that's actually quite a long time. So please spread the word, and let's all take part in the consultation. Thank you. And now I'm going to introduce Simon Browning, our speaker. Simon is we came across as the River Limb Action Group Simon when he was at the West Country Rivers Trust. He is now the monitoring technical lead at the Rivers Trust, which is the national body, working mainly on the Catchment Systems Thinking Cooperative project, which is helping to develop guidance for community-led river monitoring. Simon has worked in rivers, probably literally as well as figuratively, and river monitoring for over 25 years, including 12 years at the Environment Agency and 7 years with the West Country Rivers Trust, where he led the development of the West Country CSI volunteer monitoring scheme. So we all have to thank him for that. So over to Simon, who has 10 to 15 minutes to talk to us, but please gather your questions, put them in the chat, and then it'll be easier to manage afterwards to put them to Simon. Go, Simon.
Lovely, thank you. Shall I share my screen? I've got a presentation that I'll take you through, if that's okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Just, I mean, I'll rattle through some of it, because it's useful to know what the Casco project is all about, and what I've been doing since I left West Country Rivers Trust. Let me just see if I can see you all. There we go. Yeah, so CASCO stands for Catchment Systems Thinking Cooperative. It was a project brought about by a national group of catchment practitioners, I suppose, called the Catchment Data User Group, that was part of the catchment-based approach, which is a level of governance around catchment decision-making, I suppose. But it started off as an idea in something like 2019, I think, basically because we were seeing the rivers were in a terrible state nationally. This map shows, the 2019 status with not a single one in good status, single water body. Environment Agency monitoring was becoming less and less and fewer and further between. And this was leading to a real paucity of data. And so that the decisions we were making and the government were making and the water companies were making around where to invest in the water system to make things better were based on very wholly data. At the same time, we were seeing a real surge, even 5 or 6 years ago, in the potential and the take-up of citizen science and volunteers collecting data that we knew had to be valuable. But because there was no real understanding of the different methods at play and how to rigorously plan monitoring, I suppose, we also saw that data was not being used to its full potential. Still isn't, but certainly wasn't then. So the idea of this project came about to really put some framework behind the monitoring techniques and to really have that conversation with the likes of the government, the Environment Agency, the water companies, Ofwat, around how that data could be used to influence decision making around our water environments. So as with a lot of these projects, there was an idea that was hunting around for funding. The first funders that said yes were Ofwat, and that came with it some strings attached around it must be led by water companies and involved a lot of water company money. So this idea that was really around community monitoring has only gone forward in its current phase because of the water company support, which is important to remember, I suppose, but it also has influenced the shape of the project, I think. It certainly made it bigger and slower moving, but that's probably not a terrible thing. Because part of what we're producing is we're really trying to shift that conversation with the water companies so that they can't just say we don't value that data, we don't recognize that data, but they're actually starting to bring that data into their decision making. And the sort of decision making process I'm talking about is when they choose to invest in a water treatment works or sometimes fund nature-based solutions or natural flood management, that they do that based on the data rather than whatever their other priorities might be. So some of the things that we're producing as part of CASCO is a list of accredited methods, so we understand which ones are most appropriate for what purposes. An important part of it is encouraging the demos, and this is the map of the 8 demos we're working with. There's a couple more now, to really encourage them to document their plans, their monitoring plans, so that again other people can come along, use that data with confidence that they know how it's been collected and why. And what we're doing now is a lot of work on the data, making sure that the data that isn't just squirreled away in people's spreadsheets or even hidden away on Cartographer, but is actually openly shared. If any of you have seen the Rivers Trust sewage map that now includes the live data spills, this is the kind of space we're in working with different data sources, but putting them all on one map so they can be exposed and explored by everybody. So we tried to develop a charter in the early days, and this was kind of the rules for taking part. That has floundered a little bit in that it didn't really survive some of the tests that we gave to it. And this kind of came up in our group around people wanting to know how to approach landowners in what can sometimes be quite difficult circumstances, conditions where there's already some tensions running high about perceived or actual damage to rivers. And I think it's fair to say we weren't able to the idea was it would be like a sort of a contract where, if we do this as a Rivers Trust or as a supporting organization, volunteers would do would kind of behave themselves. It didn't really survive the testing. So that's sort of been, it's on the back burner, I think, and instead what's replaced it is these CASCO principles, which don't have that kind of quid pro quo, but they do give us something that we can say, if you stand for these, then you're welcome in the group. And if you go on the website, there is a join Casco button. So again, one of the things that came up was the idea of knowing who's doing what where as a bit of a barrier. So what we're trying to do with the Casco map is get all those groups, as many as we can, on that map to say we're doing this and these are the principles that we abide by. So yeah, check that out if you can. I mentioned a bit about monitoring planning. So this is something we borrowed from the Chesapeake Monitoring Cooperative over in the US, and we found it really useful. So we haven't yet created our own sort of version of this, but if you take that sort of steps 1 through 10, that is a good, it's a kind of a good indication of the things you need to consider ideally when you get embarking on a monitoring program. So some things, you won't solve it all, you won't have addressed all 10 before you get going, but even if you do choose to get going with something, whether it's CSI or riverfly, having in mind the wider picture and which other bits you might need to come to in the end or need to consider is worth doing. And there's some on here that are worth picking out. So what will you do? I think it's number 9. About what will you do with? Number 3. What will you do with the data? Chesapeake have a great line in there that is, don't assume that the people you are that some organization out there is necessarily waiting for your data just to fall in their laps to allow them to go off and do whatever. There's an element by which the system we work in has evolved essentially to deal with very little data. The Environment Agency have basically been collecting as little data as they can to tick the Water Framework Directive box and say, yes, here's an assessment for a water body. It doesn't really have much depth behind it. And so all of a sudden, a load more data doesn't necessarily help them do their job with their current resources. They haven't got the ability to investigate a load more pollution. So being able to say, we'll collect this data and we then have an awareness of what we can do with that data ourselves within the group that you are working with to push that data forward. And that might be as simple as kind of producing graphs or charts or maps, graphs or charts yourselves, so that the Environment Agency or the water companies can see that data without having to do that themselves. That's something that's come through quite strongly in where groups have been successful. It's because they're able to take that data to the next level. And that's also something we're working on, recognizing that at the Rivers Trust. That's part of the work we're doing around data now. But the flip side of that is when everybody's doing a different thing, and you're lucky in some respects in the West Country that there is the West Country CSI scheme that you can get on the ladder with, because where groups are doing different things, even if they're slightly different, it makes it really hard to provide consistent and kind of data presentation tools that we can give to you. So it does rely on a level of expertise in your group to be able to turn your raw data into some sort of graphical presentation, but that's something we're working on. The other thing I think I'll just mention here is also the quality assurance and quality control. So we know that volunteer collected data is often not given the credit it should have. It's assumed that it's flaky and full of holes. So we find that volunteers and community groups have to do a bit more work to demonstrate they're producing good quality data. That's not always a lot of work, but understanding the limits of the testing methods you're using and the survey methods you're using and how you can make sure that any common sort of pitfalls are avoided is a good idea. And then documenting those procedures in your plan just allows, gives whoever picks it up from the Environment Agency or the water company say, I can't just discount this data because it says something I don't like. They've got robust methods and so we have to take it seriously. Some other work we've done on the Casco project, we asked all our demos what their monitoring objectives were to start with. So why are you doing this monitoring? To think a little bit further beyond, well, I just want cleaner rivers. Because then the idea is that, and we had 8 demos, there was 40 or 50 different monitoring questions they were trying to answer. We put those into categories. And these are those categories, the 4 around the outside there, essentially, with the plan then that knowing the broad sort of requirements of a monitoring system or a monitoring question would allow us to help point them towards certain methods and certain quality assurance procedures and certain sort of graphical outputs and visualizations. So So getting on one of the tracks, so we're in this space, helps us to sort of standardize that monitoring into a number of sections, a number of different types. And again, you can find that more information on that on the Casco website. And partly what we're trying to do there is point people to the right level of data collection. So a lot of you will be familiar with the Lamotte test strips, the phosphate test strips, which are down here at sort of tier 1. We started out tier 1, 2, and 3, and then we invented the idea of the Big River Watch, which is kind of tier 0 because that's entirely observational. But the idea is, as you start at the bottom of the pyramid, it's very wide. Kind of applicability. Lots of people can do it very easily. The barrier to entry is very low. It's either free or very low cost. Training can be done either online or just by the instructions you have in an app. But the data as a result is maybe less robust, definitely less robust. As you go up the pyramid, you get more robust methods, but that tends to cost more, take more time, it's more complicated, it's not for everybody. The data you collect is higher quality, but by definition you'll have less of it. So it's not that the bottom of the pyramid is worse than the top is best. It's working out which is appropriate for the methods that you were, for the sort of the purpose you identified in the beginning. This is a slide I throw in because it comes from the Rivers Trust State of Our Rivers report, and I always think it's really interesting. We hear an awful lot about CSOs and stormwater overspills, but if you look on here, where are they? Intermittent sewage discharges is a cause for failure of about 11% of rivers nationally. Much higher up the scale. So these sectors, so essentially agriculture is top, with the water industry not far behind, urban and transport also really significant. And then the single most damaging impact on rivers is actually 35% continuous sewage discharge. So if you have a sewage treatment works in your catchment, they are pumping out polluted water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They may or may not have to monitor it for all sorts of parameters, probably not. They monitor it for very little. The water companies do their own monitoring, and they may monitor it as little as 4 times a year. So there's an issue there around our systematic use of water and treatment of sewage that needs to be addressed, I think. It's either that the discharge consents that water companies are set are not right, because if they are abiding by those discharge consents, our rivers are still being damaged by that discharge, or the monitoring they're doing is not accurately capturing the impact they're having on rivers or what they're actually discharging, or a mixture of the two. And let's also remember, all the water companies are under criminal investigation by the Environment Agency for suspected under-treating of water. So that's possibly one that one will hit the headlines sooner or later. It's been 3 or 4 years that investigation going on. So there's really an issue there. And what that tells me is, if you have a sewage treatment works in your catchment, it's probably doing some harm. And so we have had groups that have spent 2 years doing monitoring to find out that yes, there's a high load of phosphate coming from a particular part in the catchment, just happens to be water treatment works. We can shortcut that process by looking there first. And there's information on the internet about, the Environment Agency carry data about discharge consents and the operator self-monitoring, the monitoring water companies do of their discharges, and also the sort of number of people each discharge should serve. Backwards. Then I think my last slide is this one, which is, again, it's not something that we did. It's a piece of work that was written up in both of those 2 reports on the right-hand side, but it's around pathways to impact. So a question we always get asked, and I ask it myself, is how can this data we're collecting help make my river cleaner, help reduce some of the pollution inputs? And when I started out doing this, I was kind of thinking, well, it'll take us several years to amass a data set that we've got confidence in, that's got enough coverage that we can go to the Environment Agency or go to DEFRA and say, this has to change, this is what we know. Actually, and you will know all this because you'll have been working with people in your groups, those positive changes start happening very, very quickly, right from the word go. When you train someone up into what they're looking for and how to test for water quality or what wildlife to be looking for in a river, it changes people's perception and their understanding and their relationship with rivers. And that is a positive change. And you see that cascading or growing through individual behavior change, people talking in their communities about what they can do, people talking with local councillors and local businesses and and landowners. So all these positive benefits, they do start accruing quite early on. It can be a difficult job sometimes to put numbers on that, and that's what people who work in DEFRA tend to like to see, is numbers. How much benefit did this have for any pound invested? But I certainly have got huge confidence in the positive changes that we see. Meetings like this are a great example. But by all means, yes, keep doing what you're doing. That kind of social capital, if you like, of bringing people together, learning together about rivers, understanding what your local situation is, the real facts on the ground, not being swayed by media headlines when they're sort of ill-founded, but having the kind of patience and perseverance to get to know your own rivers in lots of ways, not just through water quality or through river fly, but by understanding, what the hydrology is like, how they change over the seasons. We're now in a very, very dry period at a strange time of year to have not very much rain, and rivers are behaving differently than they would have done this time last year. So understanding that comes from kind of taking time regularly to look closely at rivers, I think is absolutely invaluable. And I think that's it from me from now.
Great, Vicky.
So my question is about dry spills, Simon, because we can now look at the live data in South West Water, WaterFit Live, the live EDM data, and so we have started checking when we might get heavy rain. We haven't had heavy rain probably since October, but we did have some heavy rain in October, and we carefully watched to see when it stopped, when the CSO next to the sewage treatment work stopped discharging. And it was 48 hours later. It wasn't continuous, it was off and on, but it kept discharging. So we raised this with South West Water when we last met them, and they basically deny there's any such thing as a dry spill. Really? And they say it's within their permit and referred us to their lawyers. What do you think about this?
This is a new one. This is a game changer, I think. Where was I the other day? And I looked at the rivers, because the Rivers Trust take that data. So that data set is kind of published live via APIs and stuff. And the Rivers Trust now take that and publish the near real-time alerts. And yeah, in a period when we've not had any rain for weeks, there was several that were currently spilling. So it's interesting, to hear that that's the response you got. I mean, technically, they have a kind of, as they often do, they have a bit of a get out in that data is kind of provisional, and the data that's then used at the end of the year to produce the spill data, so the final spill data, goes through a kind of data cleaning step. But if it was me, and it is me partly, I have a river near me as well, I would be on them like a ton of bricks as soon as you see that thing spilling when it's not raining. Like I say, it's the dry spills essentially that they are all under investigation for. I mean, if you look up that EA investigation, within a few months, the EA said something like they had reason to suspect widespread non-compliance with the regulations. So I think it's going to be big news when that comes out, and I suspect that's partly why it's taking so long, because they've got so much to investigate. And a couple of years ago, you could ask the water companies for the flow to full treatment, so that's the amount of volume of flow that was going through the works data. They've stopped giving that out because it might incriminate them. It probably would incriminate them. So this is where the real damage occurs. It's in conditions like this, when there's very little clean rainwater in the rivers, that sewage has such a massive impact. When the temperatures are warm, when the levels are low, when the sun shines, and all that bacteria, all that nutrients can really do the damage that we don't want to see. So it's really important to keep an eye on that.
Oh, thank you for your question, Vicky, and for the response, Simon. That's a fairly sobering initial exchange, so thank you. So any other questions now from anybody? If you'd like to use the react button to put your hand up, or if you prefer to put a question in the chat, we'll be looking at that. Or you might have a real hand that you want to put up. Great. Bob.
In our little room, we were quite clear that we needed change at government level. We needed new laws, and we needed to have not this system of private water companies. And it's a matter of how we get there. There is a huge amount of support, and I can see that one of the good reasons for getting people involved in testing is to mobilize these people, because they then become very knowledgeable and they know what they're talking about, it and become part of a community and a sort of groundswell of. But how do we focus that? How do we get the law changed? I mean, Andrew will tell you how. I mean, one way we start with the charter for the chart, but how do we get to a position where we have democratic control?
Well, as with any law change, it takes time. But I don't know how many of you are aware of the Section 82 monitoring and that was introduced as part of the Environment Act 2021. I mean, that will, if and when that comes in, and it's scheduled to be introduced over the next 10 years, that will be the most comprehensive technological monitoring program of any country in the world. Now, and this is the legislation where water companies will have to have a continuous monitoring sonde, so a multi-parameter water quality sensor, an expensive bit of technology on its own right, probably about £10,000 worth, monitoring continuously upstream and downstream of every discharge. There are some allowances for if you've got lots of discharges, they can cluster them so they have one upstream and one downstream of the cluster, sending data in near real time to a website like the Sewage map where we can all watch it. And that is as a result of the public outcry about sewage spills that we saw, what are we now, 4 or 5 years ago. So these things do change, they take time. But, like I say at the beginning or in introduction, I've been working in rivers 25, 30 years and never had, rivers on the front page of newspapers and so high up in the political parties' agendas as we are seeing now. Long may it continue, because it's not a quick fix. And again, as Andrew will tell you, when you look at what's wrong with our rivers, yes, it's agriculture, yes, it's water companies, but those are parts of the system we live in. How on earth would we change the way we treat our water? The water we drink comes from rivers through a massive system of pipes and treatment works, and when we flush it down the loo or wash it down the sink, it goes through another very complicated system that's been the foundation of how we've done things for hundreds, well not hundreds, but 100 years or more. The same with the farming. The things that farmers do that are damaging to rivers are done to put food in our shops and on our plates at a very cheap price. So unless we're going to unpick all those systems and completely change those, the problems with our rivers will continue. So we just need to make sure that voice arguing that rivers are important and that some of these other parts of systems need to give a bit, then we need to keep that pressure up.
Thank you, Simon, for that response. Could we have a question from Alex Brenton? Did you want to read out your question on the chat, and then Julie? Is Alex there?
Yeah, the Rivers Trust is a national organisation, but I mean, we are, in this Zoom call, we are being quite parochial. We're talking about our river, our personal river. And I do, from my reading of some of the data, there are some water companies that are sort of 3 times worse than others, shall we say. Where would you rate? I mean, I looking at it, it looked as though Wessex Water was doing better than many. The ones beginning with T, the Severn Trent and the Thames, seemed to be horrendous. And I wonder whether some of the it's easy to put people's backs up, companies' backs up, by tarring them all with the same brush. So I just wonder whether the more regional thinking about it is actually more constructive.
Yeah, I mean, none of them are doing great. That's for sure. They're all under investigation, criminal investigation, as I say, for suspected non-compliance with the regulations. I'm just over the border in Cornwall, so I'm smack bang in the middle of South West Waters area, and they are consistently one of the worst performers. You can see sort of annual report cards that the environment industry produce that score the water companies out of 4 or 5, I think, stars they get, and some companies are consistently in the 1s and 2s and have been for 20 years or so. So there's a real problem there that they have been allowed to bimble along with terrible performance and still, as we know, reward their bosses with bonuses and shareholders with dividends. Now, I wouldn't claim that sort of nationalisation of the water industry is necessarily a panacea, but it's hard to argue that privatization is working very well. But I'm not old enough to remember, but I have looked back at the situation when the regional water boards were in existence, and it was that situation that was the kind of the main where the investment really stopped, decades ago, that has never really been caught up. And funnily enough, if you look at a lot of farms, it's a very similar situation. Farm infrastructure and water treatment infrastructure has not really kept pace with what it needs to have done for the last 30, 40 years, and that predates privatization.
Thank you. Julie.
Thank you, Sandra. Yeah, it's a slightly different sort of question. I just wondered how much Simon you might have heard through your work, whether there's any kind of move on the part of water authorities or the government or anybody to actually kind of highlight the fact that we are going to run out of water if we don't change the model of how we use water. And quite soon, in some parts of the country, clean water with ingress of salt water into the waterways as it gets over abstracted, and also kind of just changes to planning. So just the whole holistic approach to the fact that we waste water, we allow it to flood. Dorset Council have told us in Charmouth that there is no issue of no planning issue for Charmouth with our river. I've actually got a statement from Dorset Council saying it has no impact on the river. So I just wondered whether there are any moves as part of this to look at all of those issues rather than just looking at the fact that we have a problem. How are we going to solve the problem of how we use water?
I mean, I think from the Rivers Trust perspective, we continually push the importance and the potential of what we call nature-based solutions. So those kind of natural flood management, rewilding, nature-friendly farming type approaches, which give us lots of benefits for not a lot of money compared to large capital schemes like building reservoirs and goodness gracious, water recycling. So there are some kind of harebrained schemes out there. I mean, one of the big projects in Thames is to basically funnel, how should I say this, treated sewage from a really big sewage treatment works under London into a reservoir. And I remember being on a call with someone from the water industry several years ago now, talking about water recycling, by which they mean treating sewage to a standard that it can be used as drinking water. And they said, what, we already do this, but they refer to the golden mile. So as long as there's a mile of river between the sewage discharge and the drinking water intake, that's understood to be acceptable for public. The public see that as river water being taken for drinking rather than treated sewage being taken for drinking. Now, the rivers are used in that respect. You know, the water is treated to a certain standard, probably most of the time, dumped into the river, and then not far away, taken out again. Even if your water is stored in a reservoir, like, I mean, often the reservoirs are on tops of hills, and then the river system is used to transport that river down to the lowlands, if you like, where it can be treated and moved around for drinking. So we already have that kind of system. The pressures on that system are growing and growing as we get less clean water delivered, and that's because you know the rain happens in more intense bursts and picks up a lot of pollution from the farmland. But you know, again, it's part of a bigger, more complicated system. So the advantage of nature-based solutions is they make our landscape kind of wetter when it would be dry, and less wet when it would be, you know, flooded. So that really requires a bit of a shift in thinking, probably back to, you know, the way we managed our water and our landscapes, you know, 100, 200 years ago, when we were much more smart about water meadows and using that resource more wisely. So yeah, I mean, there is work afoot, and I heard again the other day that the water companies are focusing a lot on leak prevention again, you know, in recognition that we're likely to have a very dry, you know, period coming up with this dry spring. You know, already the groundwater in the reservoirs aren't where they should be this time of year, so we're in that risky zone. If we don't get a lot of rain soon, or the right kind of rain and all that sort of thing, we will be we'll be in trouble. But you know, again, they've worked on that kind of resilience. So a lot of the water companies have been working on being able to pipe water around from, you know, within their areas or from other areas. So, you know, I know that the South West Water can pipe water across from the Tamar all the way across to Totnes and the other side of Dartmoor if they need to move that water around. So those kinds of infrastructure projects about shifting water around have been on the go for a while.
Thanks for your question, Julie. Ian, would you like to put your question to Simon, the one that's in the chat?
I can. Sorry, just put my video back on. I've had to move. It's just set us a bit of homework, Simon. Tell us what you think are some really great projects out there that are doing great things, and we can go away and find out more about them. You don't have to answer it, but if you can drop some links in the chat or something like that, it'd be great to hear about some really good examples of citizens, people like us, trying to do the right thing.
Well, I mean, there's definitely a few that spring to mind. So there's a couple of things. So first off, I mean, I'm a bit of a monitoring nut. I've always been involved in monitoring. I believe that we could do a lot more monitoring, and it's generally a good thing. But there are circumstances as well where I've seen, and I think I mentioned it maybe in the breakout group, where, or maybe it was in this chat, where, you know, there's some things that are kind of obvious, and some things that we don't need to spend 2 years collecting more of our own data to demonstrate. And those things are, you know, so if you're in a catchment, so if you think one of the links in Andrew's information sheet is the Catchment Data Explorer. So that uses a map where you can go and look at your water body, see how the Environment Agency view it, and see which elements that's failing for. Some water bodies are only failing for farming inputs because there is no sewage infrastructure. Some water bodies are only failing for sewage. So if you're in one of those water bodies, really the first step you need to take is quite clear. It's either get to know your farmers and try and help them on the path to a bit more water-friendly farming, or it's get on the case of your water company, perhaps with the help of the Environment Agency, because they're causing the main problems. Then in some catchments, there'll be a mixture of, you know, various things causing the problem. That's often, yes, where there is a real need to kind of get under the bonnet of it and look at more data. But I hope we're going to work on a kind of a flow chart for Casco where you kind of bring people in and take them down those paths, because it's a very different undertaking if your main issue is with your water company than if it is with your, you know, the sort of landowners in your catchment. And then within that, there are some great examples of where people have set out to engage positively and constructively with the farming community. You know, and so I'm talking to several of those. So the groups who have clicked the Join Casco button, your prize for pressing that button is at some point in the future you get a call from me or one of my colleagues, and we quiz you on what you're doing, and we have a bit of a chat about how that could be helped. So through that process, I am definitely unearthing nice examples of where people have effectively engaged with either the water company or with the farming community, because they tend to be the two biggies, or where they've collected data and become the experts on which route they have to go down next. But yeah, so I think that those kind of examples will be forthcoming. I also would, you know, I used to use the Friends of the River Wye as a way of not doing it, because of that. When they first set out, they kind of collected a load of data and dumped it on NRW, Natural Resources Wales, and their reaction was, we don't trust this data. And that was a kind of a you know, a reaction to being expected to do something. But now they're a fantastic example, because they have built that relationship with NRW and the Environment Agency, and they've got the systems in place whereby their data is directly influencing how the Environment Agency react to pollution and gather their own data. So often it's not a case of using citizen science data to prosecute. Well, it's never a case of using citizen science data to prosecute or to kind of form decisions. But in terms of where the agency or Natural Resources Wales have a very limited monitoring budget, the citizen science data findings can help direct that official monitoring resource to where it's needed to collect the data that they will then use. So it's a slightly more circuitous route, but still very effective.
Really, really interesting, really helpful to hear. I think we've just got time for one more question. So Debbie Legg, you had a question there. What do you think about the rights of rivers? Have I got that right, Debbie? Are you?
Yeah,
Yes.
no, just to throw that in as a, you know, we've only got 10 minutes left, but
yeah, go for it.
Just wondered what everybody thought about the move to have rights for rivers.
Excellent. Simon, would you like to answer that?
Yes,
it's nice
so
one to end on.
yeah, I mean, I think it's a really helpful development. I think it's a really, you know, useful way of moving forward. I think it's quite a challenge in UK law, as I understand it. You know, so when I've done some reading about this, we are probably one of the, perhaps because of the length of our, you know, the time we've had our kind of law-making systems in place, we're probably as far away from it as anyone in the world. But hey, that's more reason to kind of get going on that and start building that momentum. I think, you know, the really important thing here is the people, and you know, you will all know that better than I. You are all the experts in bringing people together, getting them out on a Sunday morning, time after time, to go and do the river testing and supply that data. And that's really, so whatever it is that can get and keep people, as many people as we can, engaged, that's a great thing. My job then is to make sure that you have the technical tools and knowledge that you need to kind of argue your point where you get to with your politicians and local representatives. But yeah, I'm all for that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So I'm going to give my own thanks to Simon, but I'm actually going to pass over to Vicky to close this evening's session and other bits.
Yeah, sure. So thank you very much, Simon, not just for that really interesting.
Jazz hands for Simon.
Yeah, let's do that. I was going to say thank you, not just for now, but for all the stuff you've done over the years. And you certainly were there right at the start of our river group. We would not be doing it if it wasn't for you. And you gave us a little map with our locations on it, and off we went. And yeah, I'm just really grateful for that hard work and inspiration. And I also just wanted to thank Ian Rees for coming along, because he performed such an important role for so many of us. And I know he's stretched really thin and works really hard across so many communities. So I just thank you so much, Ian, for all your energy and enthusiasm.
Thank you, that's really kind.
Right. And what you'll get afterwards is the bullet points from your breakout groups. If you could please remember to send them in. You can either send them to our personal email addresses or the Dorset Can email address. We'll share those. You'll get your cleaning up, your river information sheet. And at the moment, our next event would be planned for next year. So we haven't got anything planned sooner than that, but you never know. If you come to us with good ideas, we might be able to oblige. I've got a couple of service messages. It's the paddle out on Saturday, which shines a light on sewage pollution. You can look up where your nearest paddle out is, but we've certainly got one here in Lyme Regis on the sandy beach at 11:30. See you in your cosy. The next main Dorset Can event is our AGM, and you're all going to go, oh, this is so boring. May the 28th at 7 o'clock, but it's not boring because we've got Nick Ireland, the leader of Dorset Council, coming along to talk about their plans to tackle the climate and ecological emergency and to answer your questions. So put that in your diary. That's May the 28th at 7 o'clock. I also just wanted to thank Sandra for brilliant facilitation and keeping us to our time, and Andrew for being the co-coordinator and for helping plan this session. And of course to all of you, because you're just all brilliant that you care about something that's so terribly important and is such a big part of our lives. And we're working so hard to tackle it. Thank you very much.